All right, let's jump right in. We're tackling Indian history today. You've given us a ton of material, and it's clear you want to go beyond the basic timelines. You're looking for the core of it, India's cultural and intellectual contributions.
Yeah, it's a story that stretches over millennia, a tapestry of empires and religions and innovations. The cultural exchange has really left its mark on the world.
And you know me, I love a good challenge. We've got a mix of broad historical overviews and more focused looks at specific achievements. Just glancing at it all, it's clear just how massive and intricate this is going to be.
It's really amazing to think about.
Hmm.
Modern humans have been in India for over 70,000 years. That's a time scale that most civilizations can't even compare to. And it all sets the stage for the incredible story that unfolds.
Speaking of incredible, the Indus Valley civilization just blows me away. They were building complex cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro at the same time the pyramids were going up in Egypt. Urban planning, drainage systems, even a written script we still can't fully decipher. It's like a whole lost world just waiting to be rediscovered.
Well, what's fascinating is that the Indus Valley civilization was really one of the most extensive urban cultures we know about from the ancient world. It covered a larger area than either Egypt or Mesopotamia, and they had trade networks that stretched across the Arabian Sea. Their craftsmanship was amazing.
Their pottery, the seals, the jewelry, those designs, so intricate. But like any civilization, there's a mystery to it. What happened? Why'd they decline around 1900 BCE?
You know, the sources point to a long drought as a big factor, which I think is a good reminder that even the most advanced societies are vulnerable to what nature throws at them.
It really makes you think. That vulnerability, though, it created a vacuum, didn't it? And that opened up space for new arrivals.
Right, and at about the same time, we see the arrival of the Indo-Aryan tribes coming in from Central Asia, bringing a new language, new religious beliefs, and a social structure that would really shape Indian society going forward.
This is where Sanskrit comes in, right? The language that gave us the Vedas, those ancient hymns that form the foundation of Hinduism. What was it about these hymns that had such a lasting impact?
I think the Vedas were more than just religious texts. They gave insights into everything: cosmology, philosophy, social order, shaped rituals and beliefs, even the way society was structured. And within the Vedic period, we see this system emerging. The Varna system, which was like a precursor to the caste system, it categorized people into 4 groups based on their occupation. But it's important to remember this early system was much more fluid than the rigid caste system that came later.
So we see this constant interplay between what stays the same and what changes. The Indus Valley civilization fades, leaving behind traces of its greatness, and this new cultural wave comes in. And it's bringing with it the seeds of a religion and social order that will last for thousands of years. It feels like we're watching the building blocks of Indian civilization being laid down right in front of us.
Exactly. And as we move forward, you'll see that this kind of blending and evolution continues to shape the story of India. Around 600 BCE, we come to what's called the Second Urbanization. New cities spring up, trade flourishes, and there's this surge in intellectual and philosophical debate. It was a time that was ripe for new ideas, new ways of thinking about the world.
And this is when we see Jainism and Buddhism emerge, 2 of India's most influential religions. Jainism, with its strong emphasis on nonviolence, it's almost hard to imagine in today's world. But it's a philosophy that really asks us to rethink how we interact with all living things.
And it's a profound philosophy, for sure, but it stayed mostly within India. Buddhism, though, which focuses on the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, the pursuit of enlightenment, it took a very different course.
It spread so rapidly beyond India's borders, became this major force in East Asia, Southeast Asia, even parts of Central Asia. It's incredible to think about a philosophy born in India having such a profound impact on cultures so geographically distant. What made Buddhism so universally appealing?
I think part of it was its adaptability. Buddhism could be embraced by people from all walks of life, no matter their social standing. Its message of compassion and self-reflection, and that idea of liberation from suffering, it resonated with people across all sorts of cultural boundaries.
So as these new religions are taking root, the political landscape is also transforming. That's where we get to the Mahajanapadas, those 16 powerful kingdoms. They were all vying for dominance, kind of like an ancient Indian Game of Thrones. And, that usually means conflict.
It did. Constant warfare, shifting alliances, new powers emerging all the time. One of the ones that really rose to prominence was Magadha. It had a strategic location in the central Ganges plain, tons of resources, and it eventually became the base for India's very first great empire.
empires. That's where things get really interesting. But maybe before we jump into that world of emperors and conquest, we should take a second to think about what we've already covered. We started with those ancient cities of the Indus Valley, then the arrival of the Indo-Aryans, the beginnings of Hinduism, these new religions like Jainism and Buddhism. And now the stage is set for the rise of empires. It feels like we've already covered so much ground.
I think you're right, we have, and this is just the beginning. But that's what's so captivating about Indian history. Each era builds on the one before it, creating this amazing tapestry of cultural and intellectual achievement. And as we go forward, we'll see how these foundations shape everything that comes after. The empires that rise and fall, the ideas that spread and change the world, and the enduring legacy that India leaves behind. Welcome back. When we left off, things were pretty chaotic with those Mahajanapadas all fighting for control. And out of that chaos, something incredible happened. India's first truly unified empire, the Mauryan Empire.
It's amazing to think about, uniting almost the entire Indian subcontinent back in the 3rd century BCE. What kind of leader could pull that off?
It took someone like Chandragupta Maurya. Ambitious, strategic, he had this brilliant advisor, Chanakya, and together they managed to overthrow the Nanda Empire. And then Chandragupta expanded his rule westward really fast.
Chanakya, wasn't he the one who wrote the Arthashastra, that ancient book on politics and strategy? I can't believe people are still studying it today.
It shows you how timeless those questions are. Power, strategy, how to govern. They fascinated people for centuries. But while Chandragupta laid the groundwork, it was his grandson, Ashoka, who really made the empire what it was, Ashoka the Great. And with him, we see this fascinating change in direction.
Ashoka's story is one of those dramatic transformations. He's this ruthless conqueror, right? But then, after the Kalinga War, this incredibly brutal war, he renounces violence and converts to Buddhism. It makes you wonder what was going through his head at that moment. Was it guilt over all the bloodshed, or some kind of genuine spiritual awakening?
Historians are still debating what really motivated Ashoka, but there's no question about the impact it had on his rule, on the whole Mauryan Empire. He didn't just become a Buddhist himself, he actively promoted it. Use his power as emperor to spread the ideas of peace and nonviolence, social justice?
Yeah, he went from conqueror to conscience of the empire, and those famous rock edicts of his messages literally carved on pillars and rocks across the land. Can you imagine coming across one of those? These pronouncements calling for compassion, moral conduct?
It must have been quite an experience, especially back then. And these weren't just vague pronouncements. They addressed things like healthcare, animal welfare, even tolerance for different religions. Think about that in a time when most rulers just use fear and force.
It makes me wonder how everyday people reacted to Ashoka's message. Did they really embrace it, or did some resist this radical change?
That's a great question. It probably varied. Some were likely inspired, while others maybe saw it as a weakness or resisted his reforms. Change, even for the better, is always hard.
So, under Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire had this golden age. Peace, prosperity, Buddhist thought flourishing. But like all empires, eventually, it breaks apart. What happened? Did Ashoka's peaceful policies play a role in its decline, like some historians say?
Well, there's no easy answer. After Ashoka died, the empire had to deal with infighting over who would rule, economic problems, pressure from regional powers. It's tough to say if his focus on nonviolence directly weakened the empire's defenses or if it was more complicated than that. What we do know is that India entered another period of instability with different kingdoms fighting for power.
It's that cycle again, isn't it? Unification, flourishing, fragmentation. But even in those fragmented times, India still produced these amazing cultural and intellectual achievements. After the Mauryans, particularly in the south, we see several important kingdoms rise up.
Exactly. Down south, you had these powerful empires, like the Cholas. They were a major maritime power, controlling much of South India and even projecting their influence into Southeast Asia. They were incredible sailors and traders, and their networks stretched far and wide. Then you have the Satavahana dynasty. They were known for supporting art and literature.
Maritime empires. I hadn't thought much about that side of Indian history. It's clear India wasn't isolated, but actively engaged with the world through trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange. What were some of the key things flowing through those networks?
Spices, textiles, precious stones, even religious ideas. The Cholas, for instance, were instrumental in spreading Hinduism and Buddhism to Southeast Asia. You see temples built in their style as far away as Indonesia. It really shows how connected the ancient world actually was.
So much going on in the south, but what about the north? What's happening there after the Mauryans? Is it still fragmented?
Well, new powers were rising in the north too. setting the stage for another period of unification and a real explosion of culture. This is where we encounter the Gupta Dynasty, often called India's Golden Age.
Ah, the Guptas. A time of huge advancements in science, math, art, literature. But was it a golden age for everyone? Did all levels of society benefit equally from this flourishing?
That's the key question, isn't it? Because while there were incredible cultural achievements, the caste system also became much more rigid during this time, which means certain groups were likely excluded from the benefits of this progress. It's important to remember those nuances when we talk about golden ages. Yes, there were amazing achievements, but it might not have been a positive experience for everyone.
I see your point. It's a good reminder to look deeper beyond the big picture, to think about how different people actually lived during those times. What were some of the specific things the Guptas did that made their era so famous?
Well, think about the invention of the concept of zero as a number. Revolutionary. It transformed mathematics. Then you have the development of the decimal system, the basis of how we count today. And incredibly, Indian astronomers at that time were able to calculate the Earth's circumference with amazing accuracy.
Calculating the Earth's circumference back then, it blows my mind. What methods did they even use? It really makes you think about the limits of human ingenuity, especially without modern technology.
Truly remarkable. Sophisticated astronomical observations and math calculations. Their scientific understanding was way ahead of its time. And it wasn't just science and math. This was an era of incredible art, intricate sculptures, elaborate temples. The Ajanta caves, with those stunning murals depicting Buddhist stories, are a perfect example of the artistic brilliance of that period.
It's an era that really captures the imagination. The Guptas, like the Mauryans before them, left a lasting impact on India. But as with the Mauryans, their empire eventually crumbled, leading to, yep, you guessed it, another period of fragmentation.
Exactly. It's like this repeating pattern in Indian history. Unification, flourishing, fragmentation. But what we see even in those divided times, there's this constant thread of cultural innovation, exchange, and adaptation.
So we've gone from the rise of the first empires to the incredible achievements of the Guptas. And I'm seeing a pattern here. Is this cycle of unification and fragmentation driven by things happening within India or by pressures from outside, or both?
It's a fascinating question, one that historians are still trying to understand. It's probably a mix of everything. You have strong leaders who can unite diverse regions, then you get succession struggles, changes in the economy, the rise of regional powers, and of course pressure from invaders.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that empires, no matter how powerful they seem, are actually quite fragile.
Makes you realize that history isn't just a straight line. It's a messy process, full of unexpected turns. It's all about power shifts and that enduring human capacity for creation and destruction.
You said it. And as we move into the next phase of India's story, we'll see the cycle continue. New cultural and political forces come into play, reshaping the subcontinent in really profound ways.
And we're back, ready to uncover the next chapter. We were talking about those empires rising and falling, but now we're getting closer to our own time, right? New powers shaking things up, and of course, the Europeans arriving on the scene. They're about to change everything.
It's a time of massive upheaval. The old ways are crumbling, and new forces are emerging, like we were just discussing, the Marathas and the Sikhs. They both rose to prominence as the Mughal Empire weakened.
Yeah, the Marathas especially, they were known for being fierce warriors, masters of guerrilla warfare. They carved out this huge empire across western and central India. What was the secret to their success? Just military strength, or was there something more to it?
Well, it's really tied to one person, Shivaji, a remarkable leader. He came onto the scene in the 17th century, and he wasn't just a military genius, he was a visionary. Shivaji tapped into this deep resentment against Mughal rule, especially among the Hindus.
So there was a cultural and religious aspect to their struggle. It wasn't just about land.
Exactly. The Marathas had this idea of a Hindu Padshahi, a Hindu empire. And that really resonated with people who felt marginalized under the Mughals, who were becoming increasingly orthodox in their rule. It shows you how powerful those cultural and religious identities can be.
And then they expanded rapidly under leaders like Peshwa Bajirao, right? It's amazing how a force that started as a regional rebellion could challenge the Mughals right in their capital, Delhi. What were some of their biggest victories or strategies?
Bajirao, he was a military genius, that's for sure. Swift, decisive tactics. He often caught the Mughals completely off guard. Bajirao understood how important mobility and logistics were. He could strike fast and then disappear into the terrain of the Deccan Plateau. The Battle of Polkak in 1728, that's a classic example. He outmaneuvered a much larger Mughal army, forced them to retreat.
It really is a David versus Goliath story, but as the Marathas expanded, they ran into another tough adversary, the Sikhs. They went from this persecuted religious community to a major military power under Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab. How did that happen? That's incredible in itself.
It speaks to their resilience, their ability to adapt. The Sikh faith itself played a big role. The emphasis on martial values, a strong sense of community, it all contributed to their military strength. And Ranjit Singh, he was a sharp and ambitious leader. He unified Punjab, modernized his army, even adopted European military techniques. The Sikh Empire he created was a force to be reckoned with. They controlled a vast territory in northwest India.
So I've got these two groups, both rising as the Mughals decline and eventually they clash. What caused the conflict between the Marathas and the Sikhs? Were they fighting over land, resources? What was it?
Mainly territorial ambitions. The Marathas were pushing north, and the Sikhs were solidifying their hold on Punjab. There was a major battle, the Battle of Jamrud in 1837. Ranjit Singh's forces really crushed the Marathas, which cemented Sikh control over the region.
So the Marathas and the Sikhs, they both carved out their own empires. But like you said, it wouldn't last. A new player enters the game, one that would completely change the subcontinent, the British East India Company.
Yeah, this is where the story takes a darker turn. The British came over as traders, right? Back in the 16th century. But they were smart. They saw how divided the Indian rulers were, and they exploited that. Used diplomacy, some sneaky tactics, and of course military force to increase their influence. That divide and rule strategy was brutally effective.
A reminder that when you're divided internally, it makes it easier for outside forces to step in. What were some of the key moments in the British East India Company's rise?
The Battle of Plassey, 1757, that was a big one. They defeated the Nawab of Bengal, which gave them control of this incredibly wealthy and strategic region. From there, they just kept expanding. Trainees, alliances, more military campaigns, often turning Indian rulers against each other.
It's kind of disturbing, really, how a trading company could become so powerful, basically the rulers of this vast ancient civilization. How did the people in India react to the British taking over? Was there resistance right away?
Oh, there was resistance for sure. Lots of it. Big rebellions and smaller, localized uprisings. The Marathas, the Sikhs, various rulers, they all fought back. But they just weren't unified. And the British had better weapons, better organization. That made all the difference.
And then after that rebellion in 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown, takes direct control. That's the beginning of the British Raj, a period that's often described as having both progress and exploitation. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, the British Raj did bring some changes in terms of infrastructure and how things were run. Railways, telegraph lines, universities were built, and they set up modern legal systems.
Yeah.
But it came at a huge cost. The policies they put in place drained India's resources, destroyed local industries. They created this whole system where India was dependent on Britain, and Britain was the one benefiting.
Classic colonialism. Take the colony's resources, exploit its people, all to benefit the colonizer. But then, in the midst of all this, a new form of resistance takes shape, the Indian independence movement. And of course, we can't talk about that without mentioning Mahatma Gandhi, his whole philosophy of nonviolent resistance.
Gandhi was a transformative leader. He brought millions of Indians together from all walks of life in this shared struggle for freedom. His commitment to Satyagraha, that nonviolent resistance, it really exposed the injustice of British rule. It resonated with people all over the world.
The power of nonviolent resistance, incredible. But getting independence was a long and difficult road, with setbacks and sacrifices along the way.
It was. The movement faced brutal repression, and so many ordinary Indians showed incredible courage, made huge sacrifices. And of course, the joy of independence in 1947 was overshadowed by the partition of India and Pakistan, a truly tragic event that caused so much displacement and violence.
Partition is a reminder of how much these political decisions can cost. The wounds of colonialism run deep. But even with those challenges, India emerged as the world's largest democracy, a testament to its resilience.
It is. And now we come to modern India, still dealing with its complicated past, moving forward in a world that's constantly changing. A story of progress, challenges, a nation figuring out how to develop, how to navigate social change, what its place is in the world.
It's been an incredible journey. We've covered thousands of years, from the Indus Valley civilization to the birth of a modern nation. Thinking back on it all, what stands out to you as the most important takeaway from this deep dive into Indian history?
For me, it's that resilience, that ability to adapt. Think about it. Countless invasions, internal conflicts, colonial rule, and yet India held on to its core identity, its culture, that intellectual curiosity. It's a story that makes you think twice about those simple ideas of rise and fall. It makes you appreciate just how complex a nation's story can be.
That's a great way to put it. If I've learned one thing, it's that you can't understand India without embracing that vastness, that complexity, the contradictions, the enduring spirit. And it's a story that's still being written, full of possibilities and challenges, a story we can all learn from.
I completely agree. As India continues to shape its own future, understanding its past becomes even more important. There are valuable lessons there, not just for India, but for everyone.